Hi, my name is Dr. Asia Eaton. I'm a psychological scientist and public psychologist, and this is Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. In this podcast, we invite human rights defenders to teach and learn from brain and behavioral scientists about how we can all use science to do human rights work that is more efficient and impactful.
Hello. On today's podcast, Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, it is our privilege to bring together human rights defender Jaclyn Corin from March for Our Lives and psychological scientist Dr. Janet Hyde, professor emerit at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to talk about how to address gun violence. Jackie Corin is a co-founder and the current executive director of March for Our Lives, one of the most prominent youth-led movements in the United States. A survivor of the 2018 mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, she helped transform national outrage into a generational movement, mobilizing one of the largest youth protests in American history and driving gun violence to the forefront of the national agenda. Jackie holds degrees from Harvard University and the University of Oxford, and in 2025 returned to lead March for Our Lives as it reclaims its voice as a national force and equips a new generation to fight for a safer, more just future free of gun violence. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be on today.
And Dr. Janet S. Hyde is Professor Emerit of Psychology and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. After decades of research on the psychology of gender, she chose as her retirement project Ending Gun Violence in America. Her book, The Psychology of Gun Violence: How Smart Choices Can Save Lives, was just published. She is the winner of numerous awards for her research, including the James McKean Cattell Award from the Association for Psychological Science, and for lifetime achievements in research addressing a critical problem in society. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's get started. Jackie, your bio described a little bit about how you got involved in creating a future free of gun violence, but tell us a little bit more about your recent return to this work.
So I have been involved in the gun violence prevention movement for over 7.5 years now. And I became involved in this work because I didn't have a choice, or at least not in the traditional sense. I was 17 years old when a gunman opened fire at my high school in Parkland, Florida. I was a junior at the time of the shooting, and in the days and weeks that followed, grief really became an organizing principle for a group of us who refused to accept that this was the cost of growing up in America. We had seen the consequences of political inaction up close, and we decided to do something about it. And so we organized a big march called the March for Our Lives just over a month later after the shooting. And what began as a march, an act of collective mourning and moral defiance, really grew into this big movement, where now I still run into young people who are involved in public service or politics, and they say the first thing they ever did to engage civically or politically was organize a walkout at their school after the shooting at my high school, or was organizing or attending a March for Our Lives in their community or in DC. And so March for Our Lives was also never about just one shooting. It was about saying that no community's pain should be dismissed as inevitable, because of course we see shootings happening in communities, especially Black and Brown communities across this country every single day. And so over time, I realized with my organizing work within March for Our Lives, I found myself moving from being an activist to also being this builder and learning how to translate that burst of outrage into infrastructure and into a sustainable organization capable of holding that power and purpose. And I was very involved for the first few years of the organization, but sometimes in work as challenging as this, it requires for people to kind of move in and out of the movement for sustainability because it's hard to do this work and think about this work all the time, which I'm so appreciative of Dr. Hyde here for stepping in while so many need to step back sometimes. So I stepped back for a few years to go to college and grad school, but I stepped back in after I finished my studies this year because I wanted to lead with that same conviction that I had when I founded the organization, but also with a deeper understanding of what it takes to sustain a movement, not just with passion, but also with structure and care and strategy.
Thank you. I applaud you stepping back, and I'm grateful for your stepping back in and all of the new strategy and learnings that you've brought to the work. Congratulations too on your graduation.
Oh, thank you so much.
So in your bio, you mention, fighting for a safer, more just future free of gun violence. What does a future free of gun violence mean to you?
Well, first and foremost, I see that future being one where our young people, our future generations, don't even have to think about the possibility of getting shot in their school, in a public space, on their streets. But unfortunately, it would be hard to find a young person in the United States today that does not experience those fears. Justice to me in this space means liberation from the conditions that make violence possible in the first place. It's not just accountability after the harm happens, which, of course, it is an important aspect of the work, but it's also about prevention and dignity and transformation before it happens. So that is really what is necessary to get us to that future free of gun violence. We cannot always just be reactive to this work. We need to be as proactive as possible so violence actually is stopped before it happens. And in the gun violence prevention space, we often talk about laws and policies, which are essential, but justice also requires looking beyond legislation to the ecosystems that shape our safety in the first place. Things like education and housing and opportunity and belonging in society, and ensuring that young people can live lives of possibility and not precarity. And there's also an aspect of narrative repair here, refusing to let stories of gun violence be flattened into statistics or stereotypes, and properly honoring the full humanity of those lost and the resilience of those who survive, because I think the voices of those who've been affected in speaking out get us closer and closer to that vision of a future free from gun violence.
Thank you, Jackie. That's beautiful. We should all hope and work for a future like the one you described. Janet, let's pivot to you. Tell me a little bit about your book, what it covers, how it envisions a future free of gun violence.
Yes, thank you. And I have to say, I'm blown away by Jackie's passion and vision. It's wonderful. And she's part of the younger generation that we so need in this movement, no doubt about it. So a little bit about my book on the psychology of gun violence. The underlying principle is we're not going to end the gun violence in America unless we understand the psychology behind it. Plus, psychology is fascinating, so I'm hoping people who read the book will just find it fascinating. One of the things I do in the book, besides bringing psychology to this huge problem, is that I integrate psychology with a public health approach. Gun violence is at epidemic proportions. It's just like a virus that kills people, and we have to use the tools of public health to address it and to reduce it. Another thing that's unusual about this book on gun violence is that it offers solutions. I have a solutions section at the end of every chapter, and then the final chapter is all about solutions. But I'll just quickly go over the topics that the book covers. The first chapter conveys statistics and the background about psychology and public health. Chapter 2 is about emotions, certainly a psychological topic. The emotions that drive people to buy guns, to carry guns, to use them. Mostly that's about fear because people buy guns for protection these days. The third chapter is about masculinity and gun violence. 98% of mass shooters are boys or men. And until we deal with that stark gender difference, we're not going to get this epidemic under control. The fourth chapter is about racism, and guns. We have such a history in this country of guns enforcing racism, both on Black people and also Native peoples. And we really aren't going to get to the bottom of the gun crisis unless we understand its racial history and dynamics. The fifth chapter is about religion and guns. There are some claims among gun rights activists that there's a divine right to have guns. And I'm a Christian, I will say that up front, but I've read the Bible a lot and I don't see that in the Bible. But we have to understand why, the psychology of why some people really believe that they have a God-given right to guns. Chapter 6 is about suicide and guns. Guns are a uniquely lethal method for killing oneself. And so we need to deal with that. Chapter 7 is especially fascinating. It's about how the gun lobby uses psychology for profit and power. They are masters of psychology. I don't know if they know it, but they have really gotten into the heads of tens of millions of Americans. And we have to understand that if we're going to counter it. Chapter 8 is about the Second Amendment and various Supreme Court decisions and national legislation we've had. The Second Amendment is not an absolute barrier to passing life-saving gun legislation. So we have to understand the details of that. And then the final chapter is about solutions. I wrap up dozens of solutions that we can work on as individuals, collectively, in our state governments, in our national government.
Wow, each of those chapters sounds so rich, and yet you managed to pull them together to create a single tapestry that tells a story about gun violence that goes beyond the statistics, like Jackie was saying. But tell me, what are some, facts about gun violence that we might not know? What are some realities that you would like the audience to be clued in on?
Well, one of those pretty well known, but I want to make sure everybody digests it, is that more than 43,000 Americans die every year by guns. And if we contrast that, for example, with the devastation at the Twin Towers in New York in 2001, 3,000 people were killed then. That's horrific. 3,000 people. And that was a one-time event. The 43,000 people who are killed in America by guns, that happens every year, and it's 43,000. So we have to understand that. Another statistic that I think the public may not be aware of is that actually 54% of gun deaths are deaths by suicide. When we think about gun deaths, we think about homicides, and those are horrific. But 54%, the majority, are actually suicides. And so we have to address that aspect of gun violence.
Jackie, I see you nodding. You're familiar
Yeah.
with these facts, I'm afraid.
Absolutely, I am. And part of what my everyday is figuring out how we communicate these things to young people in an accessible and digestible way, because gun violence is truly such a nuanced issue. And a lot of young people experience it via their fear of a school shooting or being in a mass shooting, which is incredibly valid because it is a possibility being a young person in America always, just being a person in the US in general. But also, Dr. Hyde is exactly right. A big part of this problem, are gun suicides. The accessibility of guns, and the ability for someone who wants to hurt themselves or others to be able to walk into a gun store and walk out with a gun and take their life within minutes. So there are policies like waiting periods that allow the process for actually acquiring a gun to be delayed, so that if in an emotional moment someone has a desire to end their life, they can't bring that gun home with them that very day, and they have to wait a few weeks, which gives the possibility of mental health supports to enter that person's life and hopefully save their life. But this issue is so nuanced, it is so big, and it is so abstract. So, our goal here at March for Our Lives is to educate young people about the many different nuances of the issue, the ways in which we can work to end it, and make those things feel tangible, because otherwise, taking action on this issue feels so hard to understand.
Yeah, that's amazing that there's some places that have no waiting period. I got married recently here in Miami, Florida. Went to the courthouse with my soon-to-be spouse, applied for a marriage license. We could not get married that same day. We had to wait. Or take a 4-hour education course, which we didn't know was available. So those were our options for getting married. And you're saying there's some places that you can still go into a store or maybe a show and acquire a gun that day?
Yeah, absolutely. In many places around this country. And when we advocate for common sense gun laws, a whole bunch of people, in large part due to the very strategic marketing of the gun lobby, which Dr. Hyde mentioned, people take the gun violence prevention movement as one that is trying to take everyone's guns away. And it automatically turns people off of what we are pushing for and increases the polarization and divide that we so desperately need to bridge in order to move forward on this issue. So the more we can get young people and everyone talking to their friends, families, and neighbors about the actual tangible ways we can move this issue forward and start to bring that number 43,000 down year over year. And there are a plethora of policies and community initiatives and programs that can get us there. That is not just taking everyone's guns away. That's not what we're trying to do. That is the fake vision that the gun lobby is trying to sell Americans. The closer we can get to that future free of gun violence.
Yeah, I heard you loud and clear when you said, the future of gun violence is stopping violence before it happens. It's not necessarily taking everyone's guns away. It's addressing the things that Dr. Hyde mentioned: racism, mental health, emotional issues. Dr. Hyde, tell us a little bit about how the research that you have compiled has implications for Jackie's human rights work.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I'm going to talk about maybe one set of studies that I think is particularly relevant. One of the things that we have to do at both the state level and the national level is change the beliefs of legislators who are opposed to gun regulations, because those legislators who are opposed are such an obstacle to getting common sense gun regulations passed, like waiting periods. By the way, in Missouri, there's no waiting period. In fact, you don't even have to have a license to buy a gun in Missouri. So what we need to do is change the hearts and minds of these legislators. So how can we apply what we know in psychology, especially social psychology, to change their beliefs? Well, first of all, don't yell at them. We know from social psychology there's a phenomenon called reactance. And if you press people and you humiliate them, they're going to become even more rigid in their opinions. So don't yell at them, although, it's tempting to do, I understand. But there's a technique called deep canvassing. And it's been evaluated experimentally in a number of field studies. And I think it has a lot of potential. You have to be extensively trained to do this. And I haven't been trained yet. I've just watched one short video. This was pioneered in cases of elections. So you have a volunteer canvasser who goes to the home of a voter, knocks on the door, and they have a deep conversation that may last 10 or 20 minutes. And the deep canvassing website says we reach across differences to build connections and trust through conversation. Now, what I want to do is apply that to legislators. In one of the studies, the goal was to reduce prejudice against trans people. And it was a ballot initiative actually in Florida. And I think that we can apply that, because that's a very controversial issue, just like gun safety is. We can apply that also to thinking about prejudice between gun rights activists and gun safety activists, because we're kind of prejudiced against each other. So in this 10-minute conversation, the canvasser engages in active listening and perspective taking. You ask the voter or the legislator to explain their views on the issue, and that encourages that person to engage in some deep processing about their own beliefs. Because often we just have slogans, we say them and we repeat them to ourselves. But what do I really mean if I say I have a God-given right to a gun, for example? So we encourage the person to engage in deep processing. And the canvasser responds with a story from their own life, from their own experience, so that they can both try to understand each other's perspectives at some deep level and find some common ground and some understanding. They refer to it as non-judgmentally exchanging narratives. And it works. In a number of field studies, people have, voters, and I'm hoping for legislators, have changed their minds on some of these very controversial issues. So I would like to see us implement some deep canvassing, both with voters and with legislators.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear about that research is that it sounds like a lot of work and emotional work, which gets back to what Jackie was talking about, needing to step in and step back and step in. It's a complex and multifaceted problem, so it's not going to necessarily have a one-size-fits-all or simple solution. Jaclyn, what are you seeing in your human rights work in terms of what works to change hearts and minds?
It's a good question, and it's actually a strategic pivot that I'm taking my organization, because for a long time, March for Our Lives started focusing on policy and legal advocacy work, writing amicus briefs, all of which are very influential and impactful. But sometimes it's hard for action to actually occur if people don't first understand the issue and then care about the issue. So I'm trying to think of this issue from a more cultural perspective now, as opposed to a political one, because I truly don't believe that it's a political one. The barriers we've faced are in large part political, but if we bring it back to the core of it, it is cultural. And I think a big part of being an activist and how we can move this forward from a cultural lens and angle is by teaching young people how to have the conversations that Dr. Hyde is sharing about, both with their peers, their families, and if they so choose, to go to their local city council or state house and have these conversations with elected officials. I actually didn't know back when I was a teenager that we had the access to state officials that we do. But the day after the shooting, I contacted a state senator's office in Florida, and I said, would I be able to talk with you up in Tallahassee and bring some friends? And that, became a larger lobbying trip that state senator's office helped me organize, where we had meetings all throughout the legislature with over 100 kids that I brought up with me. And the fact that we were fresh survivors of a mass shooting in our community, talking about our experience and humanizing the issue and showing these legislators who this issue is impacting, makes it something more tangible for them, because the people in power are balancing a whole lot of issues, a lot of people from their districts asking them to prioritize XYZ thing. So the more we're talking about this, we are showcasing survivors, we're talking about the people who have lost their lives, and being hopeful about the vision of the future, and also assuming best intention. My most successful conversations with people who have initially disagreed with me start by talking about our shared priority, which is making our community and our family safe. But they think that the vehicle to get there is by stocking up on a bunch of guns. I know, and I know Dr. Hyde knows, that that's not the answer, but they don't know that because they've been sold this vision of what safety means by gun manufacturers and the broader gun lobby. So the more we can have human conversations with our neighbors, that is where change has always been built and bred in this country around a whole bunch of issues. And so actually showcasing to our young people and members of March for Our Lives what those conversations actually look like and how they should be approaching them. That is the number one question I get from young people, is how do I actually go about that conversation? So we're trying to equip people with those skills.
And I love how you said, start locally, start with your family and friends, especially for young people. Talking to your representative might seem intimidating, but change can begin, at home, in your friend group, at the communities you volunteer with. That makes it feel accessible to me anyway. Tell me more then about what March for Our Lives is doing currently and what a day in the life looks like for you at March for Our Lives, Jackie.
Well, I just went through a process to figure out how we can be the most collaborative force in the gun violence prevention movement, because there are a bunch of organizations doing different types of work, but we were founded to be a youth mobilizing organization. So our focuses moving forward are as follows. First, we're working on how we can coordinate accountability campaigns so we can educate young people specifically about the gun lobby's influence on this issue. Back in 2018, my friends and I from Parkland constantly said the NRA, the NRA, the NRA. And we really built the name recognition of this incredibly powerful institution that a lot of young people didn't know about. But slowly, as it gained, name recognition, as did its former CEO, Wayne LaPierre, we were able to kind of push forward investigative forces that has led to their flirting with bankruptcy over the years, such that there's actually a lobbying force, a trade association called the National Shooting Sports Foundation, that actually spends more money than the National Rifle Association in our federal elections to block gun safety legislation. So teaching young people about the systemic forces that are blocking this issue so they understand it not to be just the result of a single shooter with bad mental health issues, but rather a systemic force that has allowed these shootings to continue to happen. So that's one thing. Another thing is really uplifting the stories and lives of survivors and victims. I think it's really important to focus on these big statistics, like the fact that we lose 43,000 people in this country to gun violence every single year, but actually zeroing in and showing the lives of these people and what is left behind. Sometimes I think that can uniquely push people to action, to feel the gap of a person's life and understand what they were all about. So we partner with different cultural institutions, documentaries, or we also do murals in different communities to showcase the faces and stories of these folks, and using our social media as a tool to do that as well. We also mobilize our members, so giving them those tools every single week to learn how to prevent gun violence on their couch, at their campus, or in their community. So there's kind of a variance in how people can get involved. And then this time next year, we're hoping to launch a program where we train young people to really become movement leaders and faces that young people can look to for inspiration and leadership. And so giving them public speaking skills, advocacy skills, and so on and so forth, because more than ever nowadays, young people are looking to influencers and people to process and learn about the issues they care about. So not so much institutions anymore. So how do we build those people who want to be, so-called influencers around this issue, and give them the education and training and resources they need to educate others? So that's what we're doing now. And every day is different, but the through line is definitely balance, balancing the emotional weight of the work with the operational demands of leading a national organization. So sometimes it looks like back-to-back internal meetings. Sometimes it looks like talking to donors to try to get them to buy into our work and support us. But my favorite part of the job definitely is connecting with young people who are just stepping into this work and want to make a difference.
Excellent. I love what you said about offering opportunities to get involved from the couch to the community. Was that right?
To the campus, to the community. So like three different kind of categories of activism. Because some people just have 15 minutes to make a quick call or write a quick letter to their elected official, but some people want to do deeper work. So trying to make that accessible at all levels.
So I'm going to pivot then to Janet and ask, you said that your book is full of solutions for individuals, solutions at the structural level. What can you tell us about taking action on the couch, on your campus, or in your community from the perspective of evidence-based research?
Okay, yeah. And actually, in answering that, I want to pick up on something that Jackie was just saying, having to do with the fact that we have a gun culture in our country and a culture of gun violence. So one of the things that we know in social psychology is that social norms are really powerful, really powerful. If you think about, if you're going out to dinner with some people, you probably think about what they're going to be wearing or what people are going to be wearing at that restaurant, and then you dress accordingly. You're thinking about the social norms. They are shaping your behavior. That's a trivial example, but it happens. All of us do it every day. So we also know that it's possible to change social norms. Right now, and this is consistent with what Jackie was saying, the NRA has shaped the narrative and the social norms about gun ownership and gun rights. And what we need to do is seize control, change that narrative, and create new social norms. So let me give a couple specific examples. One set of statistics that's been conveyed a lot is that we have 400 million guns in America, whereas our population is only 340 million people. So we have more guns than people. Now, if you listen to that superficially, you probably think, well, every American owns a gun, right? If there are more guns than people, every American must own one. And by the way, I think ironically, gun safety advocates have stressed that statistic too, and I think we may be doing a disservice by telling people there's so many guns. But at any rate, we also know statistically that 60% of men in America do not own a firearm. So that's actually the norm, but it's not what people think is the norm. So I envision billboards in the highways in rural areas and memes on social media that say 60% of real American men do not own a gun. That would, I hope, would set a new norm, because I think we have to get at these beliefs. Here's another example. Many of our public officials think that gun regulations are controversial, but many are not. For example, we were just talking about background checks for gun purchases. 92% of Americans favor background checks on all gun purchases. We need to make that a norm so that everybody understands it's not controversial. And so it becomes a new norm in the thinking of our elected leaders. I'm just at the beginning of thinking about social norms and how we can engage them. But I really like that 60% of real American men do not own a gun. How can we get that message out?
I can get that message out.
Okay, so I think you and I could be a team, a great team.
I think so too. I'm going to consult you on a whole bunch of billboard language we could use, because part of our work is doing installations in communities, and we've done billboards before to try to change cultural norms, because sometimes the policy talk just does not resonate, but we need to really strike at the cultural heart of the issue. So we'll be working together for sure.
Okay, great.
Speaking of working together, in our last couple of minutes, Jackie, I was wondering, if you could tell any scientists listening, what do you need from the field of brain and behavioral science to do your work? What questions or answers, do you need?
It's a good question, and I think Dr. Hyde is definitely well suited to answer some of them. But yeah, I think behavioral science has an enormous role to play in the movement. I've personally studied behavioral nudges and how really successful marketers and companies use those tactics to get people bought into their product or service. And I think the public service and public sector space could serve to use those traditional marketing tactics because they've obviously figured out an equation that works. But we know that Americans are aware of the gun violence crisis, but as we've been talking about, awareness doesn't automatically lead to action. So I definitely can learn more from the field about what actually moves people from empathy to engagement, and how do we help communities process their fear without becoming numb or fatalistic. And I think I also need to look more into research on sustaining motivation and resilience among young organizers. This issue is particularly challenging because a lot of people understand that it can affect them, but a lot of the leaders in the movement are people who have been personally impacted because they know deeply and personally that they are not insulated. Whereas a whole bunch of other issues, there are large swaths of people who are impacted and thus kind of take action altogether. But this is sort of like a waiting game for a lot of people. So understanding that psychology of persistence without being personally impacted, and also persistence under pressure, understanding the psychology of hope more would help us design communication strategies and leadership programs that inform and also fortify young people for moving ahead. I've personally learned the things that I need to do to prevent burnout because I've lived burnout, and to try to prevent that in other young people is such a priority of mine. So yeah, there's a whole lot of questions that I have for Dr. Hyde, and I'm sure we'll have many follow-up question or conversations after this. But yeah.
And you're giving me inspiration for new podcasts too. Hope-based communications, burnout among human rights defenders. These are issues that or solutions that cross human rights concepts. Dr. Hyde, I saw you nodding vigorously. Do you have anything to add to that?
One of the things I'd like to hear from the activists, the NRA has promoted among gun owners a gun owner identity psychologically. I am a proud gun owner. I'm a patriot. I uphold freedom. I'll protect other people. That's a powerful identity. How do we create an equally powerful identity for gun safety activists or just for the general public? I thought about terms, but I don't know that I have anything that's, quite so snazzy. But I think about a gun sense citizen identity. I think about decades ago, there was a whole movement about the silent majority. So I think about a gun sense majority. We are the majority, people who don't own guns and want regulations. I also think we need to get snazzy about how to counter the gun lobby's slogans about right to bear arms. Gabby Giffords just was pushing the concept of the right to live, which should be powerful. There's also the right to freedom from gun violence. So I want to work with some of the people who are out in the field to think about how we can promote these identities. And we're a rights-based culture. The United States is rights-based. So we have to think about what our rights are that are being trampled by gun violence.
Yeah, the right to live and the right to live without fear, the right to live in a safe and healthy environment, and the right to raise your children in a safe and healthy environment. Well, this was illuminating. I have so many more questions and ideas for future podcasts, but I'll leave the last thoughts to each of you. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with, or anything that you want to articulate that you haven't had the chance to yet?
I am grateful to have had this conversation, and I knew this intuitively, but this conversation has further proved how much we can learn from others when we bridge our different kinds of expertise. I have been thinking through messaging and how we change these cultural perceptions, but Dr. Hyde just gave me a whole bunch to work off of. So I really love that. I want to bring more of that scientific mindset into our organizing work and to test and learn and iterate in the same way researchers do. So I'm so excited about that. And I hope all of our listeners today walk away knowing the power of a good conversation and how by you talking to even 3 other people, that's the power of a spoken wheel model. If you talk to 3 people, odds are they're going to talk to some people as well. And the further and further these cultural perceptions can spread. So it's on all of us to have these conversations, but it'll be on me to make sure these billboards get on the streets.
And I have to say that I'm just thrilled with the youth movement that Jackie's leading, because that's what we need. And with Moms Demand Action, which I volunteer with, the trouble is moms have these kids that had to drive around to soccer matches and stuff, and they don't really have enough time to work on these issues, which is part of why I, as a retired person, am trying to devote all the time I can to it. But the youth movement, I think, is just fabulous. And I look forward to working with you again. And I want to thank Asia for putting us together today. This has been just exceptional.
Well, thank you, Janet. Thank you, Jackie, for your time, your expertise, and for helping to bridge science and human rights.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening. That was Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. To learn more about how we use brain and behavioral science to empower human rights defenders, find us at mindbridgecenter.org and follow us on social media.